Hello, I'm Dr. Michael Wade. Paul can't make it today, so I'm filling in as host. I want to welcome Dr. Nancy Love of Appalachia's Department of Government and Justice Studies and Dr. David Spicelin of the Department of Communication. Today on the Academics, we'll be discussing the continued souring of the presidential election and the Senate race, which here in North Carolina. Which has managed to have, believe it or not, honest political discourse in what has otherwise been a circus of a political season. Briefly, North Carolina Republican headquarters firebombing and Trump's claim of election rigging. Nancy, firebombing?
Yeah, the firebombing is, as Hillary Clinton has said, horrifying, and suggests the devolution of the American electoral process. We don't yet know. I mean, evidence has been sent to the FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia. The Bureau of Tobacco and Firearms has been collecting surveillance videos, but there wasn't one at the Orange County GOP headquarters, so we can't yet confirm responsibility. I think it's important to say that the Democratic Party has raised thousands of dollars to help rebuild the office, and I hope that this will prove to be only one incident of its kind in this presidential election campaign.
Dave,
well, there were some other instances of Republican, and I forget exactly where it was, but a BB gun apparently was used on one. And yeah, it's a terrible thing. And the lack of civility has escalated, I guess, in many ways, which is just really a shame.
Yeah, I was been thinking about that this week as we knew what became aware of what the agenda was going to be, and I kept thinking that this really began to be visible back in with the emergence of the Tea Party and the disruption of those local meetings in the primaries, where people's anger outweighed the actual issues, and I hope it stops.
Well, I'm not a member of the Tea Party, but I've seen some instances where they were peaceful.
I'm sure.
Yeah, so the Tea Party apparently is one of those things that grew out of dissatisfaction with the process.
That's a good point. The ones that are peaceful are not the ones the media like to cover. Yeah, so I think
if it bleeds, it leads. Yeah.
What about Donald Trump's claims of a rigged election, Dave?
Well, unless you're from the planet Mars, you have to admit that the press seems to either favor Hillary or not favor Trump. There's some, in my opinion at least, some inequitability in terms of the coverage. But what bothers me about Donald Trump is the whining, and some of the Republicans have mentioned that in terms of staying focused on his campaign, what he plans to do. And really both candidates have not told us much about what they will do. It tends to be driving up the negatives for the other candidates. I mean, and they both have high negatives. That's the thing that, and a lot of people that I talk to have said, I am so discouraged, I don't even want to vote, which I think is what the other side is wanting the other side who votes to not vote.
Mm-hmm. Nancy, what about the sexual assault and patriarchy or sexism issues in this campaign?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's a coincidence that sexual assault victims are coming forward following the release of the tape and Trump's ongoing remarks and tweets. And I think it's revealing a larger problem of patriarchy. We're confronting the first female potential president in this country. And I want to say, you know, patriarchy is a system, not a person. And so we're talking about institutionalized sex stratification in public office and also a gender gap in the electoral process. And Hillary Clinton is certainly an imperfect messenger for women's rights, but she has spoken out strongly about human rights as women's rights and women's rights as human rights, and said once and for all. She's had to be relatively quiet on the accusations of sexual assault and the Trump tape, presumably because of Bill Clinton's history. And so that too, I mean, needs to be brought out, I think, for this country to fully confront what it would mean for women to be equally represented in public office, to be free in public space. Michelle Obama's speech, where she said that Trump's words had shaken her to her core, that she couldn't believe that a candidate for president of the United States would brag about sexually assaulting women, resonated strongly with me.
And when was this that he said this? 11 years ago?
Absolutely.
Okay.
But he has also apparently exhibited, according to the accusers, and now, there are now 10 women who have come forward, a pattern of harassing and assaulting women.
And some of the accounts have been discounted. Other people have come forward and said, no, I was there and it didn't happen. It's he said, and she said, she said. But it's really interesting that just a couple of weeks before the campaign, people who say things that happened years ago are suddenly coming forward. What prompted them? And I don't know what prompted them. But that seems to be, in my mind, kind of interesting.
Well, they've said what prompted them in some cases, that his public denial of actions. He said it was just words, it was just locker room talk, and many of them had remained silent for years and came forward to confirm that actions had in fact occurred.
Well, here's the problem I've got. You mentioned Bill Clinton, because apparently Bill Clinton's inappropriateness dealing with women, and that's an understatement, is still going on. It's not something that happened years ago. And it's deplorable, whether it's by Trump or by Clinton, the former President Clinton. But, you know, Bill Clinton was a big hero to a lot of people, even when they knew about the sexual issues. I lived in Arkansas for 2 years, and I got to hear Jennifer Flowers had a news conference, who apparently was a lover of Bill Clinton. And she played a tape to the press, and she said on the phone to him, what do I do if they ask me about us? And he said, just lie. Just lie. Well, it's no wonder that people, and it's not just a Democrat thing, it's no wonder that people are so soured on politics when they can't tell the truth. And it wasn't right for Bill Clinton. It wouldn't be right for Donald Trump in terms of sexual inappropriateness. But this election is just weird on both sides. But hopefully in 2 or 3 weeks we'll be through it.
One quick observation and then another question about this. I think there's much to criticize in Bill Clinton, particularly in his private life.
Agreed.
But I would say that there's a difference between affairs and assaults, I take your point about Hillary not bringing. There's no upside to doing it. But what I want to ask is this: the overt sexism is one thing, and that's actually receded a great deal over the course of our lifetimes. Not entirely, of course, but what about the stuff that's not overt? Misogyny. The stuff that's rooted in fear and hatred and diminishing of women. Here are some here's some things from 2008. A McCain supporter in South Carolina to McCain about Hillary Clinton. How do we beat the bitch? And McCain, to his credit, was taken aback and merely said, excellent question. Well, how do you respond to that anyway? Rush Limbaugh Will this country want to actually watch a woman get older before their eyes on a daily basis? A bumper sticker, KFC Hillary deal, 2 fat thighs, 2 small breasts, and a bunch of left wings. Mementos from the 2008 campaign at a point where she was the odds-on, the presumptive nominee. What about those? Not so much the specifics as the attitudes underlying all of this. You know, and admitting that Hillary Clinton has had problems. She mishandled the health care proposal when Bill was first president. There's the emails, which never should have happened. She supported George W. Bush's war in Iraq initially. But a lot of the rest of it seems rooted in something that's more visceral than policy disagreements or missteps.
Just quickly, I mean, I take your point about the difference between assaults and affairs. I would say, though, the Monica Lewinsky affair was an abuse of authority. She was a White House intern.
Agreed.
So
Agreed.
that can be a continuum rather than a dichotomy. But yes, the sort of visceral response and the, I'll say, culture of disrespect for women as leaders is something that I think has haunted Hillary's campaign. And to go back to the concerns about the election, there's now a move to repeal the 19th Amendment, so deny women the vote. Nate Silver,
who's doing that?
Nate Silver has released a map that shows that if only men voted, Trump would potentially win. So that's part of the motivation behind it. So these issues are connected, and as I said, there's been continued skepticism on the part of the public about the capacity of a woman to be commander-in-chief, and confronted with a woman who is so competent, whatever skeletons there may be in her closet and her husband's closet, that these kinds of attacks are what are being launched suggests that people are feeling afraid, people are feeling threatened by the possibility of a female president.
I think there's fear of Trump. I mean, and she's trying to drive up his negatives in terms of the sound bites that she's used in her ads. But I don't know how capable, how competent she really is. I saw her at the hearings several years ago, the Benghazi hearings, and she just blew up and she said, "What does it matter? What does it matter?" It matters a whole lot. And who was responsible? Was it the State Department? Was it President Obama? And he ultimately, would be responsible for Benghazi and getting those 4 out. But that's and Republicans and Democrats both do it, where they check out in terms of responsibility. And that's the real shame in the way that this country is operated. Just step up to the plate. And for instance, in 1998, I guess it was, when Bill Clinton shook that finger and said, "I will tell you something, I did not have sex with that woman," and he mentioned Monica Lewinsky, and that was an assault. That was not an affair, and there were several other assaults that he did. But I would much rather that he said, "Yeah, I did it," and if he wanted to say, "I'm sorry." And I was brought up, Mama brought me up to respect women. My dad brought me up to respect those in authority, part of that from my religious background. But when I see people in power, Republicans or Democrats, who are not acting responsible, it's discouraging. When somebody says, "I can keep my health care and I can keep my doctor," and then that turns out not to be true, there's a lot of cynicism in this country.
Well, let's go to something a little more, a little sunnier.
Please.
Finally, substantive political discourse has reared its ugly head here in North Carolina in the Senate race. The Winston-Salem Journal, and full marks to them for doing it, wanted to know, since no one was talking about it, what the 2 Senate candidates, Deborah Ross and Richard Burr, what their positions were on climate change. And so they responded to questions put to them by the the journal. Any thoughts on their responses? Or
I'm not familiar with what they said.
in a nutshell, they both said they supported that they thought climate change was real, that it was not a hoax, and that humans do contribute to the changes and thus the effects. Ross said, and this is a quote, "The science is clear, climate change is real, and we must act to address its effects. Weather is becoming more extreme, agriculture's suffering, and families are experiencing serious health effects." And she noted that as a state representative, she'd been a consistent supporter of alternative energy. She did not respond to the question of ranking the threat level that, to national security that climate change represented. Burr said he supports producing energy without leaving a large carbon footprint, and said that he is a quote-unquote big fan of solar energy, natural gas, and nuclear power, but not wind. However, in 2015, he voted against a bill to provide 15% rebates to individuals and businesses for installing solar photovoltaic panels on their businesses and domiciles. He also opposed the Clean Power Plan, a Clean Water Initiative, and the Paris Climate Agreement, and said that the transition to cleaner fuel should be guided by technology. That's it in a nutshell. A rather big nutshell, but
Yeah.
there it is.
Well, I guess my question is what either of them will do if and when elected. And it's interesting to me that Duke Energy has now contributed to the Senate Leadership Fund, which is a super PAC that is supporting Burr and is trying to keep the Senate in fossil fuel friendly hands. So these statements are, from my perspective, a positive move. Action is going to be required to follow up.
We can talk to people in West Virginia in terms of how their economy has been impacted by demonizing coal, the coal industry. I don't know what's going to happen in terms of how the election may swing things down there, but little things like CSX, you know, the railroad. I'm a big train fan, and there used to be a lot of trains hauling coal from Kentucky down past Marion, North Carolina, and apparently a lot of those trains have dried up because the coal has dried up. I think, personally, that coal can be used for power purposes, and there's ways to do it better and smarter. But you get into the problem with government, where government, when you have subsidies and things like that, I don't know if that's always the best choice, particularly Solyndra and the wasting of a lot of money. When I start talking billions or millions, to me, my mind, you know, it's like the late Senator Everett Dirksen, $1 billion here and $1 billion there, and after a while you've got some real money. But a lot of money's been wasted on some of these make-do programs, apparently. Do we need to have better ways of powering this country? Yes. Do we leave fossil fuel? We probably have to be stuck with that for a while in terms of airplanes and things like that.
Okay. I asked about the threat level posed by climate change. Senator Burr said that President Obama's warning that climate change was the greatest threat to future generations was quote unquote laughable. That seemed to me a curious response from the leader of the Senate Intelligence Committee, since the Pentagon doesn't agree that it's laughable, nor do the world's largest insurance companies, nor do the countries of Great Britain, Germany, or France, all of which are physically much closer to the terrorists and outlaw states, which Senator Burr says is the greatest threat to the future. I don't know, what do you think?
Well, it seems like President Obama said something to tie in ISIS with global warming or climate change. To me, that's a big stretch. How do you tie that in? We've got lawless people who are taking over parts of a country, Syria, parts of Iraq, and to blame climate change on that, I find that hard to believe. Again, these are lawless people.
I think what that, I didn't hear that, so I can't say much about it, but I think that that may be a reference to the oft-cited fact that what became Arab Spring began as a food riot in Cairo, which was caused by an unprecedented level of drought. Beyond that, I don't know. Nancy?
Well, I think what's crucial is that we are now very close to breaking the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit that was set in the Paris Accords. And so even though there was a multinational commitment and what was at the time a path-breaking agreement, we haven't yet fully stepped up to the plate to address the issue of climate change. And then the other thing I would say about the Senate race, there's also an ongoing debate on HB2, and Burr's not yet taken a position on that. And the Democrats have spent millions to unseat him. And so what's interesting to me is how his race is going to be tied to whatever happens with Governor McCrory's race and the ongoing Justice Department lawsuit.
Mm-hmm. One thing that it might be worth noting to the viewers about energy transitions, and one thing is clear, at some point sooner rather than later, fossil fuels are not going to be a viable thing. And energy transitions take 40 to 50 years.
Right.
Time is late, and time is late for this program. We have enjoyed talking about this, and we will see you next Friday for another session. I'm Michael Wade. We hope you'll join us next time on the Academics.